Kumi, you were discouraged from getting involved in politics. That worked very badly, as we've discovered. And you were an activist from a very young age. And I want to quote you something you wrote. You said, describing one of your first marches, the slogan at the front of the march was, "We want equality." And at the back it was, "We want a color TV." And what were your thoughts as you were marching? Did you have a very clear idea of why you were on the streets and how you hoped it would end?
No, at the age of 15,
yes,
you don't understand, everything about big politics and so on. With our eyes, we could see when we took a bus from the township to the city, you passed white communities where there was 6 playing fields, and the school I went to had a 60-meter ground with no grass or anything. It's funny, when we used to take part in, athletic, once a year, the athletic event.
Yes.
Even though we ran 60 meters, sometimes they used to call it 100 meters and
okay.
that kind of thing.
Okay, so you were record breakers.
So that slogan, by the way, "We want equality and we want color TV." At that time, many of us wanted both, actually.
Yes. So, but you become an activist, you get involved, and then your activism becomes very serious, and it leads to the murder by a hit squad of your closest friend, Kumi Naidoo. How did that shape you? Because presumably at that point you knew this was a life and death battle, but to lose someone close to you must have been a profound loss.
No, it had affected, obviously, Lenny's family and all of us who knew him fundamentally. It fundamentally changed my life. I, by this stage, had already fled into exile. In fact, Lenny and I fled into exile at the same time in different directions. And in my last conversation with him, one of the things he asked me, he was a philosophy student, a good philosophy student. I was a philosophy student too, but I was a bad philosophy student. And he always used to say these philosophical things. And so the last time I saw him, he said, "Hey, by the way, what is the biggest contribution can any one of us make to the cause of humanity?" And this was in the 80s. So I said, "Well, that's an easy question, giving your life." And he said, you mean going, participating in a demonstration, getting shot and killed and becoming a martyr?" I said, "I guess so." He said, "No, Kumi, that's the wrong answer." He said, "Not giving your life, but giving the rest of your life." I was 22 years old at that time.
Yes.
Lenny was way ahead of me intellectually and in every other possible way. So then I flee to Oxford, and then I get a call in 1988, less than a year after I fled, saying that Lenny and 3 young women from my own city as well were murdered brutally by, it turned out, Eugene de Kock's Flak Plus unit. So what Lenny was saying in making that distinction between giving your life versus giving the rest of your life is saying that the struggle for justice, social justice, economic justice, gender justice is a marathon, not a sprint. And those of us that have had the privilege to understand it and can contribute to addressing it have a moral obligation to do for the rest of our lives.
So you're well into your marathon, and you've always been in opposition. You've been an activist around environmental causes at Greenpeace. You spoke about your hunger strike around what was happening in Zimbabwe, and it's a long list. Here's my question, though. Is there something fundamentally easier about being in opposition? That you could have had opportunities to work in the democratic government. You decided you always wanted to be on the other side of the fence. Is it in some ways a little bit easier because you never really have to take responsibility for outcomes, for example, if you were the Minister of Rural Development?
Okay, so firstly, let me be very clear that I believe having strong, effective, accountable government is a critical success factor for creating a just society. Having said that, I think it's actually wrong to say that when you are in a non-profit sector environment that you don't have constraints and so on. So here's the thing. Let me just talk about survival of a government and survival of an NGO, say. If you are in government and you mess up, as Jacob Zuma and some of his corrupt ministers have messed up our country, we have to wait 5 years later before we can address you. So you are not starved of resources. You can still continue to do the bad things and support the Guptas and the Vivian Reddys and whoever else you are your benefactors. If you are in the NGO sector, right, you are not guaranteed a flow of money from taxes to the organization. So if you do not deliver on what you say you are doing, and live up to your values, and you'll see it. It happens every now and then that an NGO makes a mistake. NGOs are just like government. Human beings live in it. The mistakes get made, and you see that they get punished. People will stop supporting them, funders will stop supporting them, and so on. So firstly, it's not easier. Having said that, most of the work that most civil society activists do has a major interface with government. Right? I mean, in the 1984 period, while we were just setting up the South African NGO coalition, we used to say that we were suffering from a disease, a medical condition known as consultation fatigue. No, because that period, 94 to 96, we were from Joburg, we were all in the cars to Pretoria every other day to give civil society input on. And one of the lessons, on any number of things, one of the lessons I learned from it was the mistake that I made and many others made and continue to make, is that we mistook access to power for influence over power. Just because you have access doesn't mean you have influence. And sadly, to a large extent, in our democracy, since 1994, with notable exceptions, most of our government has treated civil society as free labor, as a nuisance, and we will get away with as limited amount of consultation as possible.
So let me ask the question a different way, and let me call in some help. If you were to call your daughter Naomi, who has effectively guided your career, as you were describing a little bit earlier, getting you into Greenpeace, and you said, I've just been offered a really interesting job. I'm going to be Director General responsible for renewable energy in South Africa. Would there not be something in that job where you have to, you've got to wear a suit, you've got to meet with suits, you've got to, in a sense, be more conservative in the way you work, but you've got your hands potentially on an incredibly powerful lever. Is that something, first of all, would your daughter say, would she help me here and say, Dad, I think you've got to do that? But secondly, is that not something that you've ever wanted to do? Because they're different, aren't they?
No, listen, to be honest, I thought that, coming back from exile, working voluntarily for 2 years, helping to build up the ANC as a legal political party, to prepare it for the elections and so on. So a lot of that time, I thought most probably I'm going to end up in some public role. But what worried me was I was just seeing a different culture emerging within the ANC already in 93, not even before the elections, where before that, all our logic and so on was about contribution, sacrifice, and service to our people. It was never about looking at, and in fact, we used to put our hands in our pockets and take the last cents and print that poster, hire the bus for the rally and so on. But already in 93, you could see the culture was changing. People were talking about positioning and what. And that turned me off. But then, I've never said it in the past, and I will never say it. I'll never say that I won't go and work in government. There have been various government positions that I've been reached out for, Director General positions and all over the time. I can be honest with you and say every position I talk to the folks, and so on.
Weighed it up.
Whenever jobs and opportunities of contributing have come up, the only criteria I've used is, at this moment in my life, does this organization or environment gives me the chance to make a maximum positive contribution, and that's what's guided me. So if an offer came from government that I was convinced that I could go in and make a contribution, I would not scoff at it at all. I'm not inviting offers from government, though, just to be clear.